G'day, Keir. How you doing?
Andrew, how you going?
Good. All the better for being able to have another chat with you.
Oh, you stop it. I'm happy to. We've done this a couple of times now, haven't we, Andrew?
Yeah, we
We've
have.
chatted about Wormwood Apocalypse
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it's a delight to be able to talk to you about a shark film as well. Like you're stepping into different worlds here. Stepping away from zombies and into other creatures and stuff, which
I
we'll get
joke that I'm
into.
just making my way through all the monsters, film by film. Zombies, demons, giant spiders, sharks.
We've
The
kind
net,
of done
the
Frankenstein as well and stuff like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I've picked and stolen from little bits and pieces here and there. The next one's going to be uh, dire wolves, like monstrous wolves in a forest, kind of like the grey. So yeah,
Interesting.
yep.
Interesting. I guess let's. One of the questions I haven't asked you then is about your interest in drawing into these kinds of monsters and these creatures. Like, what captivates you about a good monster?
I mean, you sort of grow up watching what you love, and I've always been a big fan of Jaws and The Exorcist and Evil Dead, obviously, and Alien was a big one for me. Aliens, all of that kind of stuff. I love those films. I really grew up watching them. So there's that. But I guess, when you're a horror filmmaker, like usually you're a kid who grew up afraid of the dark. And
Yeah.
like one of the things that you can do in order to offset that is to kind of make friends with the monsters, like one of the things I was hoping with Sting was that I have intense arachnophobia, and I was hoping that if I spent 2 or 3 years just looking at spiders and thinking
Right.
about them and writing about them, I might be able to conquer my fear. And I think that's how you make horror filmmakers, is just scared little kids who want to not be scared anymore, so they try and control what makes them afraid by writing about it, or making films about it. And I think that's a big part of it. I think.
Yeah, I've often thought about that as well in the sense of controlling your fears, right? I'm absolutely terrified of caterpillars, which is not a very common fear. In fact, I've never met anybody else who's afraid of caterpillars, but I'm absolutely
They're
terrified
kind
of
of
them.
creepy, I will admit.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want them on me. I don't mind looking at them, but I don't want I don't want a
Yeah,
caterpillar on me.
yeah. It's the movement, it's everything. It's just not right. But I've often talked to people about, oh, they're like, there's ways of exposure therapy and things like that. And I was like, it's not impeding my life. I'm not having difficulties and all this kind of stuff. But I also kind of love being afraid of caterpillars, right? And I love the fear of, the unexpected fear, which is such a strange thing. And I think spiders kind of do that too, because you don't know where a spider's going to rock up. Do you have that kind of relationship with your fear of spiders?
Spiders and sharks, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I watched Jaws when I was a kid, and just
Yeah.
anytime,
Yeah.
and because my dad is a surfer, like he's surfed every day of his life for like 40 years. So I grew up on beaches, and as soon as I saw that film, anytime I go sort of past my waist, and you get up to the neck, and then especially when you're swimming in ocean, and like it's so
Yeah.
dark you can't see what's down there, you don't know what's staring up at you with teeth. Anytime you're swimming in any kind of volume of water, I just hear that music, da dum, da-dum, 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 and I'm swimming back to shore. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
went out too far, you know what I mean? I always like to put at least a couple of children and a few old people between me and the ocean, just in case. And that's just a habit, So I've always been terrified of, sharks and spiders and snakes. You grow up in Australia, and like half of Australia is trying to kill you. And if it's not, the poisonous snakes and spiders that can literally, like the funnel web, if it bites you, you're dead in an hour if you don't get to a
Yeah.
hospital. If it's not the sharks and all of that kind of stuff, it's serial killers. Like we've got all the serial killers out there. It's just like I grew up very much constantly going to the bush. My dad loved the beach and the bush. He's a classic
Yeah.
Aussie, and so he'd always take us to the bush and we'd camp out. And I was just terrified of serial killers and what's out there in the dark, and the fact that the gum trees, they look like bones reaching to the sky. And I
Yeah.
was always terrified of the Australian landscape. And so for me, Wormwood was very much me going out into the Australian bush and trying to work out what's so scary about it for me.
Mm.
And so it's always exploring those themes, but it's just like I said, I was an anxious kid, and I always was afraid of the dark and all of that. And at the end of the day, I just know fear really well, and I'm good at communicating it. And so if I'm going to be a filmmaker, it's probably not going to be musicals for me.
Yeah.
It's like horror is just it's a genre that I understand, and so I could communicate it to the audience effectively.
I kind of like to see what you would do with the musical, but it would be interesting.
I'd actually like to do a musical. I was thinking about it the other day, but it'd be fun to do a musical where like the guy's powers of or the person's powers of like violence is opened up through musicals. So if
Right.
he does a big New York show tune, suddenly he can kick ass. You know what I mean? And I'm like, I would love to do that kind of thing, where it's like every set piece is him having to act out like some kind of massive show tune, and like Jackie
Yeah.
Chan suddenly it unlocks his powers. So even my musical would be horrifically violent. So what are you
Yeah.
going to do?
Of
It's
course.
just my style.
Yeah. But speaking of fear, like you're adding another layer of fear here, which is bringing in the fear of the soldiers, right? Which is interesting because you've not really used the Australian soldiers all that much. Like I would say some of the characters in Wormwood are kind of Australian soldiers, but they're not really Anzacs, in the traditional sense. But that's who you're working with here for Beast of War, and their level of fear of going into the unknown at first obviously in the jungle and then stepping into the fog literally.
Mm.
um
The
that's
fog of
another.
war.
Yeah, the fog of war. That is literally the next layer of fear, and so you're exploring something that is really human there.
Mm.
What was the kind of what did you find as you were writing and researching this particular film about that level of fear from soldiers?
Well, there's a few things going on there. I mean, one of my favorite films of all time, possibly my favorite filmmaker of all time, definitely my favorite Australian filmmaker is Peter Weir. And so Gallipoli I've seen like 20 times. I mean, I just
Mm.
adore that film. It's absolute poetry. Um, and I've always wanted to do something like that, in World War II, a period,
Yeah.
film. And I've kind of realized that it's very difficult for somebody in my position to go, oh, can you guys give me $45 million to make a epic war film? It's probably not going to happen. But if I put a shark in it, they'll let me do it. So sneakily, I've made a shark film, but actually, what I'm trying to do is my version of Gallipoli. Um, so I really wanted to make a shark film, with as much poetry as possible.
Mm.
And I, my mother's father, Jim Roach, he died in the Pacific in Papua New Guinea when she was 3 years old, and she grew up without a father, and that was a big deal for her, and that had impact on
Yeah.
her and on me and my brothers growing up with a mother who didn't have a father, and I got to know him in the research of this. I read his letters home, and I really did a lot of research on him and what kind of man he was. And he was amazing. Like, he was a
Mm.
school teacher, but he was brave, and he was a natural leader. And the men who served with him loved him and trusted him with their lives. Um, and he was just a great, humorous Aussie bloke who
Yeah.
just was taken from us in a war. And so there was a personal connection for me with that. And a lot of kind of my writing of Leo kind of was influenced by that. Like, a truly great guy, like just a real
Yep.
hero, the guy you want to be next to in war. And I guess Joel would have been Joel, who played Will, the younger guy. That's probably more me in war. I'm like a scared dude. I don't know if I'm going to run or cry or fight.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't know. And so I wanted to explore the younger guy, this poor 17-year-old who's too young to even be in war. And that was another thing that I read a lot of books and read a bunch of books on the actual event that I loosely based this on, which was the sinking of the HMAS Armidale in
Mm.
1942. And half those kids, they were kids. They're 17-year-old kids, and the bravery in the face of just abject horror that I read about was
Yeah.
inspiring. And after reading those books, I'm like, oh, I can't make this movie. I can't make the reality of this. It's too It's too horrible. It's
Yeah.
too kind of bleak, and it's too sacred. Like it's a like real people lost their lives, and it was quite a horrific tragedy. So I kind of just did my own riff on this, and um, that's why it says inspired by real events rather than based on at the start of the film. Um, but yeah, I really wanted to explore what it's like to be a young Aussie bloke in 1942 who goes into this with patriotism and trains for war. And
Yeah.
before you even get to pick up a gun and actually fight for your country, you're just in the water and you're battling sharks. And it doesn't really matter like what the context is with war. It's brutal and it's going to get
Mm.
bloody and it's going to test your humanity, and I
Yeah.
was kind of interested in trying to explore that, with just seven guys on a raft.
Well,
Yeah,
I
so
think,
this was a fun one. This was different, Andrew, like very different
yeah, I
from
can
anything else
imagine.
I've done before. Like, and it
Yeah.
came out different, and I'm very happy with that.
Well, as you should be, because I think, I mean, I interviewed Lee last year around like when he got a Rising Star nomination for something, and
Boy
he
Swallows
had,
Universe, I think. Yeah, he got a lot of heat
yeah,
off the back of that.
he-
Yeah,
yeah, and he's huge in that, right? Like he's great in that. But
he's great. Yeah,
he talked briefly about working with you on this, and he said it's the most fun he's ever had in shooting a film. And you can feel it, right? You can feel the camaraderie. I can never say that word properly, but you know what it is. Um, you can feel it within the guys there. How did you get them ready for that kind of relationship before even shooting?
I mean, a lot of work went into that, but
Mm.
you don't need to really do that much work. I mean, that was one of the most one of my happiest kind of moments was like just early on when the boys arrive and they put on the uniform and you can just tell, like me as a filmmaker, I'm like, I get to make a war film. The boys all arrived and they're in a war film. And they all grew up watching Saving Private Ryan and
Oh
Band of
yeah.
Brothers, and they're like, oh, we're doing it. We got the guns, we got the helmets, we got like, and they immediately just went, okay, we're a crew, and they immediately bonded and did all the things that you need actors to do, and even the extras, like I was like,
Mm.
oh God, what are the extras going to be like? Because we were shooting out in Byron. I was like, oh, we're just going to get a bunch of surfies. It's not going to feel right. And as soon as they arrived, they cut their hair and they were boys from the 1940s. And
Wow.
and they connected in like I've never seen a bunch of extras. So like the key cast and the extras, they just became soldiers like within hours almost. But we did a lot of work. John, we brought in this wonderful guy who he'd worked with Dale Dye, who did all the training for Platoon and Thin Red
Mhm.
Line and movies like that. And so he immediately just got the boys and goes, okay, get your uniforms on, get your boots on, come to the pool, jump in the pool. I want you to do laps, 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 keep the boots on, and he's yelling at them. He's going,
Yeah.
boys, don't you cross your arms. What are you, pregnant? Don't you look at me when I'm yelling at you. Get in that pool, get in that pool. What are you, 40, 50 years old? Get in there, and like these poor
Well,
guys were freaking out but loving it, and they got smashed by him in the first, couple of days, like, sort of forced into this drill sergeant kind of mentality. And they hated it and loved it at the same time. They're just like, oh, we're going to war, and he really made them into a unit. So much so that I'd come on set and like the extras and the boys would be saluting me, Captain. All right, what are we doing today? And it's good to see you. We're ready to go. And I'm like, did you just salute me? I'm, I kind of like this. This is great. I was like, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
yeah. So you're building on the truth of people, the history as well. But one of the things which I really appreciate that you've embedded into the film is Mark Cole-Smith's character. And in Australian film and history, we don't really get to see Aboriginal soldiers, and yet they played a major role in
Yeah,
the wars.
yep.
And we rarely get to hear their presence in the actual going out and fighting and things like that. And so, to have them as a central character, to have him as a central character there is huge. Um, what was it like building that character with Mark and making sure that you were able to get it right on screen? I think I've lost you. I think I've gotten you frozen.
It
Possibly.
means cry of the eagle hawk.
Hang on. Sorry, you froze just a
You know,
moment
my
there.
dad gave me that name.
I don't know if you can
Oh,
hear me, but you've
okay,
completely
we
frozen.
blah blah blah. Testing, testing, testing.
There we go.
Let me
Testing,
see if I
testing.
can.
Do you want to jump off and then jump back in again?
I'll go off the. I'll go
Oh,
off the
there we go.
wire. I just went off the Wi-Fi.
Ah,
Is
cool.
that
All right.
helping?
There we go. Yeah, that's helping. Yeah, you're coming through much better there. So
All
yeah,
right.
so
Well,
I
let
didn't get
me
any of what you
know. I
said.
could move to a different area in the room.
No,
That's all
no,
right.
that's good. You're
Yeah.
fine
So
now.
the
Yeah.
question, you know, it was an Indigenous soldier question. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like. I've always liked putting Indigenous characters in my movies. My name is Kia, Kiah, which is an Indigenous word. It means cry of the eagle hawk, and I mean, I don't really have any right to feel close to the Indigenous cultures because I'm a white bloke, but I do because, you know, I grew up with an Indigenous name, and we were very much taught a lot of Indigenous social studies at school. So I grew up reading about the Quincan and Dreamtime and the Rainbow Serpent, and I don't know, it's like it's in me, and like there's
Yeah.
nothing I can do about that. And even the first film I made, Wormwood, like, you know, I chucked in an Indigenous character and had a great time with Leon Birchill. You know, just collaborating, like, and you know, he's putting all this stuff. He's like, I would like to put in, my, um, I would like to use my mob's language and all that. I'm like, yeah, and cool, do whatever you want. And like, I had this great collaboration. And then later on, I found out it's like, oh, you're not really supposed to do that until you have to get like cultural like
Yeah.
collaborators and all that. But I was young; I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So you know, moving on, you know, through Wormwood Apocalypse and into Beast of War, we've been very careful to make sure that we've had Indigenous consultants. On both Wormwood Apocalypse and on Beast of War, Wayne Blair
Yeah.
was amazing enough to step in and like help with a lot of the Indigenous consultation. Mark Cole Smith was an official Indigenous consultant because he's from where we were making the film
Right.
or setting the film, which was Western Australia, Broome. And so yeah, the flashbacks to him and his brother are set off the coast of Broome, and so it was important that we got all of that right. But even
Mhm.
in my research, like I didn't know that Indigenous soldiers, like, you know, only got like a third of what the white blokes got. Like I couldn't believe that. Like that's
Yeah.
insane. Like they're risking no more or less of their life, and like half would be like horrible, but you're like a third, like that's insane. Like the just the inherent racism was horrific, and it was quite funny. You know, when I wrote the original draft, I went very soft on the racism because
Mhm.
I just didn't feel comfortable, you know, um, and Blake Northfield, the producer, read it and he goes, "I love this. This is great, man." But he's like, "What's going on, like, with the racism? Like, you haven't put any racism in, like." And I'm like, "Oh man, yeah, you're right." And he goes, "Come on, man, you got to go back and you got to do that stuff." Like, so he really pushed me to be mean, and so you know, there's a lot of horrible racist words and slurs,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, you got to do it because I mean, even me growing up in the 80s, the racism was rampant. Like, it's hard to explain to young people today, but like the horrific indigenous jokes and stuff that were going around, like just violent, horrible,
Yeah.
evil stuff. Like, I just grew up hearing that like all my life. And if it was that bad in the 80s, imagine what it would have been like in the 40s. And so we had to put that in. And it was pretty funny watching the young white actors squirm when they had to say that stuff. And like Mark like took it like a champ. Like he's one of the most confident dudes I've ever seen. And you know, he was having a lot of fun with them, you know, going, "Oh mate, you did that, you did that take a little bit too, like, you sure you're not racist?" And he's like, I'm acting, I'm sorry." Like he's just giving him shit. And so it was pretty amusing to see how he handled it and the confidence with which, you know, he went through those scenes. But yeah, he was into that stuff. He's like, let's try and tell the truth. And it's not like we took a big brave swing or anything. Like, you know, Mark's character is like a true hero from the ground
Yeah.
up. Like it's kind of hard to feel sorry for him when he's that bloody good looking, when he's bigger than all the he's bigger than everybody, he's tougher than everybody,
Yeah.
he's braver than everybody, and he's more good looking. So he starts off on the right foot, but like to not have the racism in there would have been a big mistake. And it was nice to be able to put a little bit of reality into what otherwise would usually be a sort of straight up and down genre film.
Yeah. And skewing away from that kind of reality to talking about different kind of reality, which is working in a water tank, right? And
Mm.
obviously the decision to not shoot out in the ocean is a wise one for your safety, for the cast, the crew safety. That makes sense. But how did you go about prepping this water tank? Like it's a huge tank, and I don't think, from what I understand and have read, it that kind of thing hadn't really been built in Australia before. So that process, how'd you go about that?
Well, it was an interesting thing because, I mean, the way this film came into the world was, a couple of years ago, Blake called me, and he's got a very good relationship with the film commissioner of Malta. And Malta has one of the biggest outdoor water tanks in the world. That's where they shot Gladiator and all those different things. And so he, but basically just called me up and he goes, "You got anything set on water? I can get access to a big tank." And I'm like, "Water? It sounds like a shark film." And he goes, "Great. I'll, write it. I'll call you in a month." And it's just like, that's how films get made sometimes. So I wrote this film to be a lot more realistic and set on a giant outdoor water tank in Malta. So originally it was going to be a very kind of realistic, gritty kind of war film. And then we actually went over to Malta and started pre-production. And what happened was Spielberg, ironically, because I've stolen the central concept from the SS Indianapolis speech in Jaws. And I've just kind of reverse engineered that to go into HMAS Armidale as opposed to the Indianapolis. And I've kind of used his idea from that as my film. And Spielberg came in and basically just like booked up all the tanks for Jurassic World, whatever it is,
Right.
the big
Yeah.
one that recently came out. And the Maltese film commissioner just like, "Well, you can do it, but you'll have to wait a year or whatever, for Spielberg to finish with his dinosaurs." And we're like, "Yeah, we can't do that." So we very quickly realized we would have to shoot this in Australia, and the only way to do that would be to do it like indoors, because the biggest outdoor tank is like, it's not an infinity pool like in Malta. It's like an outdoor tank up in Queensland, and it's all blue screen. And like, we can't have a 96 minutes of blue screen and having to put the backgrounds in every single scene. I mean, that would have cost like millions, and we just didn't have that budget. And so I realized very quickly we're going to have to do, a couple of volume screens, but basically build a tank indoors. Um, all the other tanks in Australia were kind of either too expensive or too small. Like, I needed 40 meters, and all the other tanks are like 25 meters, like the indoor tanks. So it's like, yeah, we're going to have to build a 40-meter tank, because like, that's the amount of space I need in order to create the ocean, because the only way I knew how to do the ocean indoors was to just lock them in a fog bank. Like, we can't do volume screens and blue screens for the entire movie. So like, we're just going to lock them in a fog bank, and it's going to be like Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat. They're in a fog
Yeah.
bank, and we don't know, we can't see out of the fog, which is great, because then they're trapped even more so in a claustrophobic single location, which actually is a better concept for a horror film. But yeah, so in order to create space within that fog, I needed at least 40 meters so that people could disappear into the fog. You can't do that in 20 meters. And I mean, I was terrified, because I just knew that there was a really good chance of this film being visually boring, and B, it's just going to end up looking like you shot it in a tank, and it's going to kill the reality of the thing. So we really had to pull out all the stops, cinematically speaking. And I was kind of talking to my production designer, just going, "Oh, I think this is going to be terrible, Esther. The only way that we could possibly do this is to go back to how they did films practically, back to how, Hitchcock's Lifeboat, but more importantly, even further back to the 20s with films like Murnau and there's Murnau's Nosferatu and Murnau's
Yeah.
Sunrise, and just really make it like you would make it, if it was like 100 years ago in a studio. And then you could uh, make it like Francis Coppola made Dracula. He was effectively doing Murnau in color in a studio, like with
Yeah.
that. So I was like, we could do Nosferatu with a fin. It's the only way to do it. And she's looking at me going, that sounds better than the other idea. And I'm like, it does sound pretty cool, actually, doesn't it? And so we just went with this really hyper stylized, very, very hyper color palette. And, every scene, the great thing about fog is shooting through fog is photographically gorgeous. You're always going to get this beautiful backlight with the sun coming through the smoke and all that kind of stuff. And in order to keep the palette interesting so that people didn't get bored, every scene would change. Every scene had its own color palette, as the sun moved around. And you'd have like the blues, in the pre-dawn mornings, and then you'd have these beautiful pink sunrises, and these blood red sunsets. And of course at night you go, oh well, maybe we could have glowing green phosphorescent neons, in the water. Yep. So you've got all this, hyper neon green like stuff coming out of the water, and suddenly you've got a film that just kind of looks like no other shark film.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, like, it's probably the most beautiful looking film that you've shot, and no slight against the other ones, but they're almost designed to look dirty and mucky and everything. But you've got Mark Wareham here who does a great job, and it is quite beautiful to sit there and watch. And the beauty of it is this wonderful contrast to the situation that these guys are in. But I'd love to explore what that beauty means to you, like being able to present that kind of shade, those shades that you're talking about. Like, what does that mean to you to bring that to life on screen?
Yeah, I think it is the most beautiful film I've made, and I think a lot of that does have to do with like a gritty palette, like for the other ones, like a gritty classic horror palette. But also, like we effectively gave Mark, this giant softbox with fog, and like I'm just like, dude, go Storaro, you know what I mean? Like, you can make this look like the early Storaro films. And so we really photographically opened it up and just went, you can't go too far with beauty in this one. Like, just don't worry about reality. Just make it look as gorgeous as you can. And he was pretty happy about that. It's funny. I talked to him afterwards, and you really bond on these films, and people start to tell the truth. And he goes, "Oh man, like I wasn't sure about this." He's like, "I don't know if I wanted to do a shark film." He's like, "I'm a fan of your work, and that's why I took the call, but I wasn't sure." And then he goes, I was talking to you, and suddenly I'm going, oh, Mark, we can make it like German expressionism. It's Murnau with a fin. It's, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, with a hyper stylized, hyper saturated, fog bound, photographically insane, acid drenched look. And suddenly he's like, oh, I'm making this film. It's like, this sounds fun. I like this. And so I think, conceptually, he wasn't sure if he wanted to commit to, kind of this crazy horror film. But, as soon as we started chatting, he's like, this is going to be fun. And it was, and the good thing about Mark is, I mean, he's brilliant. You can see that with his, work in, The Drover's Wife and all the other millions of films he's done. And, he shot half of Boy Swallows Universe. I mean, he's one of the great Australian DOPs, but he's fast. And like, that's what we needed. I just, at no point could I stop? We only had 6 weeks to do this. We had a week in the jungle and like 5 weeks in the tank. And like, we had so many scenes and so much to cover. I couldn't wait for lighting. And he just doesn't stop. Like, he just works at a cracking pace. And, I'll never forget the first day we came up on set. I'm running around like an idiot, like I usually do. I've had too many coffees, and I'm like, oh, we can start with a wide, and you pull back with a steady cam, and then we've got like another camera over here covering this, and then covering that, and then we hop over here, and he's like, yep, okay, let's do it. And I'm like, oh, you literally no questions. He's like, no, let's just do it. And I'm like, oh, I like this guy. It's just like boom, 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 and it's beautiful, So he's fast and brilliant, which is an unusual combination. It's hard to get both,
Yeah. So obviously we've mentioned Jaws a couple of times, And I mean, this year in particular has been like a landmark year for Australian films about sharks and stuff, which Beast of War is part of, and that's pretty
Dangerous
phenomenal.
Animals, I hear, is amazing. Yeah, the reviews are phenomenal. Anybody who's seen that film just says, yeah, that's second
Yeah,
level. You know, they were
yeah,
shooting that up the road when we were shooting ours, and like we were sort of hearing war stories from each. You know,
yeah, yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed both films, and then obviously Fear Below. I haven't seen that one yet. It's on my list to watch, but obviously the main thing about Jaws is that the shark didn't work, and that helped amplify what the film was like. So when you're stepping into the water, you've got the shark. How do you prep for the possibility? Is this going to work? Is this not going to work? How do you get yourself in the mindset for your shark?
yeah, it's a different thing, you know, because Jaws, you know, I mean, I don't know, it was like a $25 million budget, but if or 27, I'm not sure, but if you adjust, it's effectively $100 million film. It's a massive studio
Yeah.
film, and they shot that thing for like 6 months out at Martha's Vineyard. So like, yeah, I mean, we all heard and we all read about what happened and how horrific it was and how the shark
Yeah.
just wouldn't work. But he could just futz around for a few months, shooting this, shooting that, expanding this scene, doing that. Like, I didn't know, I don't have time for that. I've got 5 weeks in a tank, and that's it. Like, there's no like kind of no real overtime. You can't afford to on an indie, and um, no real possibility for reshoots or
Yeah.
extensions. Like, it's just the budget's so tight, especially when the production is literally building the biggest indoor water tank in Australia, like 40 meters long. Um, you know, 2 million liters of water. It's like, yeah, it's like being an architect and building a building before you shoot in the building. Like, it was just, I can't even tell you how difficult that was and expensive it was,
Yeah.
especially for an indie film. um but yeah, I didn't have time. Like, the shark had to work. Like, and like you mentioned Fear Below.
Mm.
I was very lucky in that Steve Boyle, Formation FX, had made the shark for Fear Below. And I had come in to help on some reshoots. Steve Boyle
Mhm.
actually directed the reshoots. Blake brought me in to do some directing. And I think I made 3 suggestions. Like, Steve was fine. Like, I got there and I was like, Steve is a good director. I'll just stand over here and
Yeah.
watch. But I was able to watch. And so I saw how he utilized the puppet, and I saw how the underwater photography was working. And it was great because I was able to actually plan how I would do that with my film. And then I had big discussions with Steve about, okay, well, we needed it was a 3-pronged attack for building the shark. He's got this giant puppet that, like, you basically put a stuntman in, and, like, you know, he works the jaws, and it's a classic. It's like a really scary Muppet, but it goes underwater. Very easy to use, but you have to, like, the one thing I noticed was, um, what you need to make that work is to have these huge underwater explosions of CO2 that would
Right.
cause the water to surge. Because when looking at shark attacks, the tail under the water is going so hardcore that it froths the water, like, you know, they're in a
Yeah.
like it's a washing machine. It's just explosions of water. It's like there's so much churning underneath. And so we needed to create that effect with huge explosions of CO2 while the puppet is biting at the actors in an interactive capacity. You know, it's just
Yeah.
the teeth are not real; they're just foam. So you can be as violent as you want with that piece. Then we needed the fin to work. So digital fins to me don't work. Like, the
Yep.
water displacement never looks right. And if you just put a fin on, like, a scuba diver, it just doesn't look right, because, again, you've got a thing that weighs about a ton moving under the water. You need to be able to see the weight of the thing on top of the water. It
Hmm.
needs to register on top of the water, so that it shows that, like, under that fin is a very heavy, huge creature. And so he built
Yeah.
basically a submarine that, like, moved through the water, and you get these big surges off of it. And you know that, you know, whatever is creating that fin, you know, has a lot of weight and menace under the water. So we built that. And then we built the most expensive piece, which was what we call an attack head, which is basically, you know, the whole top half of the shark weighs half a ton, and it's animatronic, and it's built on railings under the water, and it surges up, and it creates naturally these big explosions of water that show how heavy it is, and
Yeah.
that sort of comes towards the actors, and then you kind of got to cut because you can't have too much interaction with something that weighs a ton because you'll break a leg. And so the puppet immediately was pretty easy to use, so that worked instantly. The other two, not so much. And we never really got a proper, actual successful test done before we shot it. I mean, we got some stuff that looked okay, but it never really got there. And we were just like, mate, just please, cinema gods, But it worked, and like we got in there and we had our big shark day. And like if the shark didn't work, I was stuffed. Like I didn't have the budget or the time that Spielberg had to fix this. And, my shark had to work. And, kudos to Steve and his team. When it needed to work, it worked, and it worked very well. And and thank God for that. And his team also, he's got a digital team, so he does practical and digital through his company. And so anytime you see the shark in wide underwater, in a wide shot, it needed to be digital. And so he covered all of that too, and I thought it looked pretty spectacular. So I was very, very happy with the work that Steve and his team did for us. We were very lucky.
Yeah, I think it's really effective. Out of curiosity as well, because I often talk to people like yourself and we talk about the making of the film or what the film's about and stuff, but I rarely talk about what happens to the stuff afterwards, right? So what happens to the tank now? Is it still sitting there? And then where's the shark? Like, how does it, is it like sitting in somebody's living room? Like, I've got a shark now. What happens with it afterwards?
We tried to convince Screen Queensland to keep the tank because we were just like, this is the biggest tank, the biggest indoor tank in Australia. And like, people are always making shark films. Like, you guys probably should have this because the only other big tank they've got is in, it's on the Gold Coast. That big tank they've got out there, but they don't have a big indoor one. And Screen Queensland, I think they were keen, but like, it's hard because it would have taken quite a big chunk of their budget to kind of allow for that. And they just weren't ready for it. And they were just like, look, we'd love to do that, but we can't make it work with our budget this year. So we got rid of the water and we packed it away, and it's sitting in a warehouse somewhere. Bronte Pictures owns it. Blake owns a giant tank that's just sitting there. It needs to be reassembled, in order to work. But, it's a tank and it works. But we had to disassemble it, which I thought it was a real pity because it was a real opportunity for Australia to have like one of the big indoor tanks in the world. But it is what it is, and I certainly understand their position. Again, the shark, I think the shark's just sitting with a big covering over it, like in Steve's company's backyard.
But it still exists. That's amazing.
It exists, yeah. And you'd probably have to do a bit of fixing on the skin and reskin it for another thing. But I don't know if you could use it for another film because we made a monster shark. It's like it's a zombie shark.
Yours.
It doesn't look real. It looks monstrous. So it's like you'd have to want that look if you wanted to, make a film. But it's funny, these things. You put so much effort, and it's just hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of work and parts, and hundreds of people work on it. And then it sits in a drawer somewhere, like I think Sting, the giant spider, it's just in a cupboard at Weta. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, somebody's going to be cleaning and go, oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Close the drawer and go, okay, well, let's not look in that drawer again. But yeah.
Well, I mean, part of the reason I ask is like when I went to Universal Studios in California and did the behind the scenes tour and stuff, and they had that huge warehouse of all of the props and stuff, and you just see all this film history there, and Australian film history kind of gets not ignored, but it's not respected as much. And I always get a little bit sad when I hear stories of this got discarded or it doesn't exist anymore. And it's comforting to know that the shark's at least somewhere and exists somewhere, so that part of film history exists. And even if it's not going to be used again, it can be visited and seen and stuff. So that's nice. Yeah.
Well, it's just money, and it just takes money to store and upkeep. And, one thing that we don't have a huge amount of is money.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got an incredibly supportive government in terms of grants and all that kind of stuff. But Australia, is the world's biggest small town. We're a small town country, and we don't have a huge amount of money to spend on cultural archiving. And and
Yeah.
I wish we had more, and I hope we have more. But there's a sort of small town mentality, and I remember going out pilgrimage. One of my I shot a short film out in where'd they shoot Mad Max? The
I
Silverton
like,
Hotel out in.
yeah.
I went on a pilgrimage and to find the Mad Max Interceptor, and like we went to the Silverton Hotel and I'm like, I heard you guys have the Interceptor here, and he's like, oh yeah, she's out back, and like you have a beer and then you go around back and it's just parked in there like shit, crappy little parking lot, just sitting there gathering dust. And I'm like, oh man, like, can I get a photo? And like, we rented it like to use in the short film. So I've got the Mad Max Interceptor in one of my first short films called Roadrunner. So like, we rented it and used it, and the V8 Interceptors in one of my films. And it's so funny though, because like, I'm going, oh man, it's so good that you've got this. He's like, this isn't the original. He's like, the original got stolen and crashed. Some bloke got drunk and smashed it. We didn't know. I had to rebuild it. Like, this is a rebuild. And I'm like, oh man, that's so Aussie. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
people are just accidentally getting drunk and taking our film history for a spin and wrapping it around a pole. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just we've got a down and dirty approach to our arts history. Really.
We do indeed. It's something. Um, as a last question, which I'd love to, you've always find space for comedy in your films, and sometimes
Mm,
it's more prominent than others.
mm,
But the comedy here is very organic and natural, and
yep.
I think it leads to one of the best scenes that you've written, which is the uncomfortable scene of the pee scene.
Mm,
Um, and that is both a level of comedy, but it's also seriousness too. Like they have to keep themselves hydrated. It's a way of dealing with it. Um, but there is also this comedy of seeing a group of men drinking their own pee. Can you talk about injecting the film with that level of comedy or that style of comedy?
well, anytime you've got a bunch of boys sitting around without a girl or a woman there to kind of even them out socially, and if there's wee wee or poo poo involved and a bunch of
Yep.
blokes on their own, it's going to be funny because there is nothing that men love, more than a wee or a poo or a fart joke. So I just milked that as much as I could because I just I mean I grew up with brothers and we've all got rowdy bogan mates, and that's just those conversations. I've just seen it happen a million times. And I remember seeing a very bleak survivalist film set in Australia, and they had to drink some wee and do that stuff, and it was like so serious and like so just played for horror, and I'm just looking at it going, nah, you'd be laughing. If you've got to drink if you're in a situation where you've got to drink your own wee, you got to laugh. Like, it's so
Yeah.
horrible, but it's like, I mean, who's going to do it first? Oh my God, he's going to do it. You'd be giving each other crap, and so I just wrote it how it would be if me and my mates were in that situation. And it's funny because it's my favorite scene in the movie from an audience perspective. And I did, even just shooting it and cutting it, I'm like, oh, this is gold. This is going to be really good. And to watch it in a room full of like a couple of thousand people, everybody just goes silent. You can hear people going, "Oh God!" Like, no, no. My mum's sitting there, and she just looks at me and she's going, "Kia, come on!" And I'm like, "Come on, mum!" Like, they gotta. You don't want them to die, do you? And
Yeah.
but people love it because the whole room stops,
Yep.
and you see this incredibly horrific kind of very disgusting but necessary scene. You got to do it, you got to
Yeah.
survive. And then spoiler alert, they drink their wee and then the heavens open up and it rains, and it's the biggest laugh in the film.
Yeah.
Because I really milked that moment, and you got to do it. I think if you're doing a scene like that, you have to dive in. You can't skip past something like that. It's like, no,
No.
that's a big moment when you've got to drink your own wee to survive. That's a yeah, that's a footnote in your own personal history. That's you're never going to forget that moment. So yeah, we shot it and it was super fun. Yeah.
Oh, it's great. Yeah. It's always a delight to be able to talk with you. Thank you so much for the time and for the film as well. I'm excited to see what you do. This wolves thing sounds exciting as well. But it's always great to see a new Kia film on the horizon.
Oh,
So
thanks, Andrew. I really
yeah,
appreciate that. I've been doing this for a while now. Like, in your head, you kind of think, oh, like, I'm a young filmmaker, and you're like, no, man, you got grade. You're 46. This is your fifth film. Like, you are now, you go not a veteran, but like you're like, yeah, you're an old dog now. But it's nice to be able to move into this section of my filmmaking where I'm name above the title guy. You know, it's all I ever wanted when
Yeah.
I was a kid. And to see a Kia Roach turn a film, it's like, oh, the idea that that even means something to somebody is like just blows my mind, you know. And I feel like I've really hit my stride again. I feel I hit my stride running pretty hardcore with the first film, and then you kind of
Yeah.
you start doing it where it's not just your mates, it's like producers and financiers and distributors, and it's like you're playing a big game now. And you sort of, I really feel like I sort of tripped a bit, you know, just trying to work out how the industry works. And you know, one of the things I love about working with Blake Northfield is he just wants me to make my film. He's like, don't
Yeah.
worry about everything else, just let's just have a vision together and just make it the way we made Wormwood. And so I really feel like I found my stride a little bit on this one. Yeah, I'm proud of it. And it's good to talk to you, Andrew. It's always good to talk to you. Yeah.
Likewise. Yeah. Well, have a wonderful day, and enjoy the release of your film as well. It's going to be great. Yeah.
Thanks,
Cheers.
mate. Yep.
No worries.
All right. Take it
Take it
easy,
easy.
Andrew.